Hello, my name is Olu Osha. I like talking about American presidents. Earlier, I did a video discussing Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson, in which I did a comparison and I mentioned certain terms which I didn't define. So I want to use this moment to define some of those terms. And the terms are negative liberty, positive liberty, and exaggerated liberty. Now, these are concepts that are embedded in our government, in our constitution, and the way our lives are structured in America from the time of our founding fathers. So these concepts are from the classics, right? Of course, we all know that our country is based on the notion of liberty, and we wanted liberty from the crown, but it goes beyond. It's not merely academic. Practically, what does it mean? Our founding fathers were students of the classics, especially Alexander Hamilton, and John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, James Madison. They were all students of the classics. So you even see that our Constitution, those notions of liberty, they come from our founding fathers' understanding of the classics. So I'm going to define some of these terms now and give examples. Now I'm going to start with negative liberty. Negative liberty is basically the individual being free from restraints, being free from external restraints. So your freedom from coercion, your freedom from government interference, your freedom from even censorship. So if you take a look at our Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments, you can look at some of those amendments like freedom of speech. That's a form of negative liberty, right? So where the government is removing barriers to our freedom. So for instance, in freedom of speech, the barrier is could be censorship. So the government is removing censorship, so you have the freedom to talk. The Fourth Amendment, the barrier is interference. The interference is search and seizure in your home, right? So those are barriers that are removed, right? The government removing barriers. So the freedom from barriers, obstacles, and coercion. That's negative liberty when we're talking about negative liberty. On the other hand, when we're talking about positive liberty, that has to do with freedom to act, our freedom to exercise our self-will, our freedom to be masters of ourselves, of our destiny, our freedom to pursue our goals. That has to do with positive liberty. The government also has a role, right? So in being able to fully exercise our freedom so we can realize our goals. For instance, if your goal is to start a business, well, you do need access to funds. So maybe if you were born poor, somehow the government can make funds available for you so you can start your own business. We can also consider in terms of, for instance, if you want to buy a house, right? You want to buy a house in a certain neighborhood. The negative liberty would be you not being stopped, right? The removal of obstacles, you not having a barrier, you not being barred or prevented from actually buying a house in a certain neighborhood. That's the negative liberty. But in terms of positive liberty is you actually having the funds, the money, the resources to be able to buy the house. So positive liberty has to do with your capacity, your access to resources to be able to exercise your free will. So that's negative liberty versus positive liberty. Negative liberty deals with the removal of external restraints and barriers and obstacles to you exercising your freedom, while positive liberty deals with your freedom to actually act, to pursue your goals, to be master of your own destiny, to be self-governing, to self-manage yourself, and also it also concerns you having the resources as well to self-realize, to realize your goals. So that's positive versus negative liberty. Now, in terms of exaggerated liberty, and I'm going to put all these things together, why it matters, because I done an earlier video discussing. I'm outside, so there are bugs all over the place. Excuse me. I done an earlier video discussing comparing Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson, and I raised these terms: exaggerated liberty. So Alexander Hamilton was concerned about exaggerated liberty, right? Exaggerated liberty basically means excessive liberty. Exaggerated liberty deals with an individual's freedom, which doesn't have any limits to it, and it's very self-serving, and they take it to an extreme. So it has its downsides, right? So concerns about that Alexander Hamilton had were, for instance, if you are free, right, you're free to do whatever it is you want to do, you might not, your liberty, your freedom might conflict with the freedom of other individuals in society who have freedoms, for instance. So if you're free and you decide, well, no one can put any constraints on you, and you're not exercising any constraints on yourself, you might decide to just go and beat up anybody you want, punch up someone because you're free. But individuals in society are also free from harm. They're supposed to be free from harm just like you, so you're impinging on their own freedoms as well. So that's exaggerated liberty. Excessive liberty. It's also called excessive liberty. So when liberty is exercised by an individual without respect to self-restraint, and it's just completely self-serving, and it's in total disregard to the greater good of the community. Now, importantly, I'd mentioned that our founding fathers, they were students of the classics, and so there's an Aristotelian notion of liberty, which says that liberty should be balanced, and there should be moderation. That the virtue of liberty is when it's done in moderation, where there are restraints, and it takes into consideration the public good, it takes into consideration public order, right? You don't want to exercise liberty in such a way that it impinges or it negatively impacts public order and social order. So liberty should be held in moderation, and these were the concerns of Alexander Hamilton. Alexander Hamilton, as a reason why he thought of the notion of the electoral college. He didn't invent the electoral college, but he supported the inclusion of the electoral college in our constitution, in the selection of the U.S. president, because Alexander Hamilton, he thought that the masses, right? The masses were fickle. In fact, he called them a great beast, right? Because he thought they were fickle, they were unpredictable, and because they were uneducated, he thought that was a negative in their ability to self-govern and properly pick the president. So he thought the electoral college should be made up of wise men, people who are very analytical and know the qualities our leader, the president should have. And so he clearly was an elitist, and it's kind of a paradox considering that Alexander Hamilton was actually born poor. He grew up poor in the island of Nevis, but Alexander Hamilton was a genius. I've mentioned it before that he believed in geniocracy, right? Government of geniuses. So Alexander Hamilton was a genius. John Adams, wasn't wealthy as well, like his counterparts, George Washington or James Madison or Thomas Jefferson. Alexander Hamilton and John Adams didn't have the sort of privileged backgrounds that James Madison, Thomas Jefferson had. However, these men were geniuses, right? So there's something, a ruler government of the elite, when the elite are geniuses. So they believed in a geniocracy, and that was something that Alexander Hamilton sort of advocated. He thought that the government should be led by the wealthy, or the well-bred, or the highly educated. So he was very suspicious of the masses, and he thought that the notions of exaggerated liberty or excessive liberty, that if the masses had this excessive liberty without constraints, without education guiding them, they might be swayed by a demagogue, right? A demagogue who could become a tyrant, a demagogue who would not be guided by the public good. So these were Alexander Hamilton's notions on liberty, and our founding fathers as well. So there are pros and cons to this, to these concepts of liberty. And exaggerated liberty, basically, he looked at it from a point of view, a perspective, that it has to be restrained, and it has to take consideration of ordered liberty. So ordered liberty is the notion that, well, you balance your freedom, your individual liberty, with social responsibility, with social order. There has to be a balance. Of course, ordered liberty is a concept that it was coined or used more prominently later on in the 20th century, around 1937, in the Supreme Court case Palco versus Connecticut, which Justice Benjamin Cardozo, he made reference to ordered liberty. But again, this is really a concept that was there. It's in our Constitution, because when they're saying that individual citizens need to be free from government interference, government coming into our homes, for instance, without unreasonable search and seizure, and without a warrant from a neutral judge. This is still dealing with concepts of our liberty, liberties that we have, versus the need for law and order in society. We need to have law and order in society. Even when we consider the First Amendment, freedom of speech, for instance, negative liberty instance is the freedom from censorship, right? Freedom from interference, so we can have free speech, we can say whatever we want to say. But we also have to consider, when we consider ordered liberty in an ordered society, we don't want people just going ahead and saying, well, go and kill X and X person, go and kill such a person, just because you have freedom of speech, right? Just because you want to be able to exercise your freedom of speech, you don't want to destroy somebody else's liberty by ordering their execution arbitrarily, right? You don't want to. That would be some kind of chaotic society. So when I say ordered society just means that a society where we sort of have a social contract in which we implicitly agree to follow certain norms, laws, values, so that there can be order in the society, there can be public order, so that there's no chaos in the society. So Alexander Hamilton, a reason that he really suspected the masses also was because he feared society degenerating into anarchy. And he had the example of the French Revolution, right? The French Revolution, where the masses just went crazy, the peasants went crazy and started to decapitate their aristocrats. They committed regicide, and so he feared America could degenerate into such a society, right? That happens when we don't exercise positive liberty, we don't have ordered liberty, and we don't exercise that's constraint on our liberties, right? And so he feared that degeneracy. And one other one of the downside of this exaggerated liberty that Alexander Hamilton was very concerned about is also nihilism, right? Nihilism is a society where there are no values, right? You just you don't believe in anything, you don't respect authority, you don't respect institutions, you just think existence is meaningless, and so therefore you can just go ahead and kill people, blow the society up. Many terrorists, for instance, they're normally nihilists. They don't believe in anything, right? They don't have any values that they hold on to. They don't respect authority, and so this isn't what Alexander Hamilton and the founding fathers wanted. So they were very focused on pursuing an ordered society where we have a social contract in which our laws, our institutions, our norms, our values, they worked together to create an agreed notion of justice and fairness. So I've tried to discuss, these concepts I mentioned earlier, ordered liberty, positive liberty versus excessive liberty, and exaggerated liberty. Exaggerated liberty just means excessive liberty that's self-serving, where there's no restraint, and it can easily degenerate into anarchy and nihilism. Whereas positive liberty means the freedom to act, the freedom of the individual to act, to attain their goals, to realize their goals, and what they need are the capacity and the resources to be able to realize their goals, right? And negative liberty, on the other hand, means freedom from barriers, freedom from external restraints. You can consider positive liberty as also a freedom from internal limitations, right? Your internal limitations. For instance, if you say, well, you want to become a lawyer, right? Your internal limitation would be, are you going to wake up and study at night, right? So those are your internal limitations. So you've got to be able to act on your self-will and remove your own internal limitations, as opposed to negative liberty. Those are external restraints. That's a government preventing you from doing something. For instance, the government saying you cannot go to a certain area, or the government, let me use the example of free speech again, the government saying perhaps that you cannot speak, censoring you, saying you cannot say certain things, you can't use certain words, censorship. So that's negative liberty. So you want to remove those barriers, external barriers that prevent you from exercising your own your liberty. My name is Olu Osha. I like talking about American presidents. I also drew attention to color of law violations, pivoting on subordination of perjury and fraud on the courts. I was swatted on May 16, 2023 in my own home. I wasn't committing any crime. I wasn't going through any crisis. A man called Jide Ware committed perjury on an emergency evaluation petition. I'm not sure why he did it, but in all likelihood it was probably to obstruct justice, to prevent an EEOC complaint I'd filed. I was working at the Department of the Navy, and I'd filed a discrimination and hostile work environment complaint. Similarly, I had a pending discrimination and hostile work environment and sexual harassment complaint with the Department of Defense. Now, when I was swatted by Montgomery County Police and locked in my own home, falsely imprisoned. I was tasered and shot in the head. I had these scarring, on my head. Eventually, it impeded the ongoing investigations, Office of Special Counsel investigations, EEOC investigations, and regarding my complaint of harassment in the Department of Defense and Department of the Navy. So it was a form of retaliation. Jide Ware committed perjury on an emergency evaluation petition. I've not had my day in court, and you can see I'm somebody who believes in the rule of law. An ordered society maintains the rule of law. Our laws, our values have been abused. There's the perversion of justice, and the courts in Montgomery County Circuit Court in Maryland and its district court, they've been abused. There's been an abusive process to violate my constitutional rights, my fundamental rights. I was dehumanized in my own home, and there's been an abusive process in which I've been barred from receiving justice. I've been prevented from working for several years now, and there's these trumped up charges that were filed against me. Ironically, then the police officer who shot me, who dehumanized me, who injured me, now falsely said I assaulted him. I've not had a day in courts. My name's Olu Osha, and I'm seeking justice. I'll keep you posted. Thank you.